We're now on the top of Daf Beis Amid Beis. Lo matya amrle nistafcha sadeu. She cannot claim in this case of a Vesas Kavua that his mazel was goring, because this is Kavua, this is part of her biological system. It's not something that he caused. We could have predicted this mirash. So it's not because of his mazel. And in this case, for sure, the Gemara thinks that he doesn't have to support her and malal mazonos. There's no way we can point an accusing finger at him and blame his mazel. But kiti boilach is the suffix shelo b'shas vesta. She has an unusual re'iyas dam that is not predictable. Mai, shall we say in this case, kaven to lo b'shas vesta havya motzi amalon istachos adeu. Now she could say his mazel caused this unusual situation, which blockades the possibility of having the chuppah, and therefore, if he's the gorem and the cause is his, then he has to pay a mazono. So, Dilma, how we say, "Kevan de ikanoshi de kamishanya vistayu." It's quite common that a woman should see dam, even if it's not at the time of her vest. Is therefore kishas vesta dam. It has the same status as shas vesta. And she cannot point a finger of accusation at him and blame him and say that it's his mazel that caused this. And the reason for that is because this is also within the realm of normal kind of predictable situation. Hoshid Rav Achai wants to come to a conclusion because of the lashon of the Mishnah later on in Zayin Hagazman. We learned Higiyazman v'lo nisu ochlos mishalov ochlos b'truma. So Rav Achai wants to be medayik from the language of the Mishnah lo nasu lo ketani lo nisu. If it would have said lo nasu, that would imply that the Baal is the subject of this sentence, and he didn't marry his wife. It doesn't say that in the Mishnah. It says lo nisu, that they were not married. Like the subject now is shifted over to her, to the bride, as opposed to him, lo nasu, the groom. Hechidami. What is the exact scenario of the Mishnah? Ida kama akvan inu. If the women were ma'akiv the nesuin, and that made that was a deliberate decision on their part. Why would she be able to claim mizonos? Shita that the Chachamim would not be mechayiv the Baal to pay her mizonos when she's the ma'akivis how to sue it if she made that deliberate decision that she wants to postpone the marriage. The itness, the situation of onus. It wasn't her deliberate decision. It was a circumstance that was imposed upon her. Ki hai gavna, like for example, she became a chola, she was personida, and that's the reason why he didn't marry her. And nevertheless, ktani, ochlos mishalav ochlos bitruma, even though the reason why she wasn't nises, the higiazman, is because of ones. Nevertheless, the Rabbanan said, "Higiazman v'lo nisu," she couldn't get married. Is ochlos mishalo? He has to pay her mizonos. And now Rav Ashi is going to express a dissenting view, and he's going to reject this diuk of Rav Achai from the Mishnah. Rav Ashi li olam emelacha kol onsa lo achla. In other words, when it's an onus situation, it matters not whether it's because of him or because of her. She cannot demand mizonos. And the Mishnah that says lo nisu instead of lo nasu to come ma'akve inu, that the Baal is being ma'akev the nisuin, and the dinu, it really should have said the boilach lemisne lo nasu, right? That he was guilty of not marrying her and postponing the marriage. But I did the Tani Resha bididhu, Tani Nami Sefer bididhu. Since the Tana in the Mishnah begins in the Resha where she is the subject. It says in the Mishnah, Nosnu lebesula shnema sar chodesh. We give her a full 12 months to prepare for the chuppah. So she's the subject of this halacha. Is Tananami Sefer. Also in the Sefer, the Mishnah uses that language and puts the emphasis on her, lo nisu. But according to Rav Ashi, the Baal is mi'akev the nisuit. So it means lo nisu hanoshim la noshim leficha noshim ikvum mili nase. They were machayev him because he was guilty of postponing the marriage, and it should have said lo nosu. But I the Tony Resha bididhu, Tony Nami Seif bididhu, bidid he. But as far as onus is concerned, then that's a different story. That he wasn't deliberate in postponing the marriage. These were circumstances beyond his control. Now, in general, in the Torah, there's a halacha of ones rachmana patra. The Torah doesn't impose chiyuvim and punishments on a person who is onus. When circumstances were imposed upon him against his will, he had no choice in the matter. And this pasuk of La Nara Nasa Davar in Kitetze, in the parsha of a woman who was raped, and she's exempt from punishment because she was onus, that becomes the paradigm for this principle of ones rachmana patre. And now, in our sugya, as we're going to learn it, we found a din of ones as far as the chiyuv habal b'mizonos ishta. Rav Yosef said that will derive from Shmuel that if there is an ikuv for the marriage because of ones, like for example, if he takes ill or she takes ill or she becomes a nida, eno malo mizonos, he's not chayev, which means ones rachmana patre. Then in the case of ones, he's not going to be chayev any repercussions of the ones. And based on this, Rava is going to ask about the status of onus in gittin when a person gives a get to his wife, and he makes a t'nai in which the chalos haget will depend on a kiyuma t'nai, but at the end, the kiyuma t'nai was ba'onus. Is that considered a kiyuma t'nai? Omar Rava, ula inya gittin eno ken. In other words, even though Rav Yosef said that if the ikuv to the Nisuin was a result of onus, then he's not chayiv from his onus because onus rachmana patre. But as far as gittin is concerned, if there was a kiyuma t'nai, albeit ba'onus, then that t'nai is considered as if it was fulfilled because it was fulfilled literally, and therefore the get is a valid get. Rav is creating a contrast between the din of onus in mizonos as opposed to the din of onus in kiyuma t'nai with regard to a get. What was the t'nai that he established? He said, Imlo basi mikan viad shloshim yom, if I don't come to you in the next 30 days, the get should be a get. And he couldn't come because of extenuating circumstances beyond his control. Is alma kasova rova ein onus begitit. That onus is not effective to be mevatel the get, but rather we're going to consider that there was a kiyum t'nai, and the onus element is irrelevant. Minole l'ravaha, and now the Gemara embarks upon an inquiry, an investigation. What is the source from which Rava derived this conclusion? Elam, if you're going to say that he learned it from a Mishnah in Gittin Adaf Ayin Bava Beis Mehod Nisnan, man gave a get to his wife when he was going out to a journey. And at the moment that he gave his wife the get, he stated, the get should become a get if the t'nai is fulfilled and I don't show up in the next 12 months. At the end of the 12 months, Mace, he died. So within the 12 months, he died. Ain't no get. Not a valid get. Just 1 second, I'm sorry. Let me just take a short break. So the Gemara now is medayik from the Lashon HaMishnah. The Mishnah says meis eno get. So the Gemara is medayik dafka mes hu de eno get, because there's a principle called ein get lach hamisa. And we're assuming now that the gerushin should be chal at the end of the 12 months. It wasn't a Tanai Me'achshav. If he died in between, so by the time reached of Higia Zmana, at the end of the 12 months that the get should be chal, he was already dead. So that's ein get lach hamisa. That's a whole different principle. Chala, let's say, for example, there were circumstances beyond his control that prevented him from coming within that 12-month period. He got hospitalized. A raise a get, implying that it would be a get because there's no problem in get lach hamisa. He's alive. And this would prove that the get is chal, even though the kiyum tanai was ba'onis in the case of a chola. And this diuk of Rava is what we call hechrich, is a compelling reason for this diuk. We're not going to say that mes in this Mishnah in Gittin is lav dafka and hu adin chola. So the Mishnah just gave one example of an onus that he died and he couldn't come, but Einochinami, the same din would apply for Uzachola and the get would not be chal. He says that that's not shayach. He says the afimes einatam mishum dein get lach habisal mishum chatnai is kind of honest, only yesh honest begitin, and therefore it would not be a get. No. In Cain Hoyla Tarl Channel Chola, the Tana should have told us Chola, even though it's a lightweight kind of onus relative to Misa, and we would certainly derive with the Kolch game mess. So from the fact that the Tana mentioned only the onus of Misa, it must be that the Tam is not because of onus, but because of the other reason of Ein Get Lachar Misa. So Gemara says, no, I'm going to deflect this proof. Dilma li'olam evilacha chola nami eno get. It could be even in the case of chola, we would apply the principle of onus. There's no kiyum atnaya because he was onus, he was chola, and therefore he didn't show up. But he gufa kamashmal and they ain't get lachar misa. The Tana wants to teach me another din, another principle, and name get liachar misa, which is only applicable if he died, obviously, not if he's sick. So therefore he mentioned death to prove and establish that they get lachar misa. But Einochinami, the Mishnah would agree that the get would not be get if he was onus, like a case of chola. So the scenario which the Mishnah addressed, namely that the Baal died, is Mishnah Tola Mishnah Shetola Baal Eschalos Haget B'Tnai. The Mishnah addressed the case where he said that the get would only be chal if lo basi, im lo basi mikadri ad shnei masar chanut. So there's no real nafkamina here in the din of ein get lachar misa, because even if he didn't die and he was honest bishum choli, and that's why he didn't come, then it would likewise not be a get because that's not a kiyum tonight. That doesn't qualify as a kiyum tonight. It was only bonus. But there would be an afkamina of ein get lachar misa in a case where there was no tonight. Let's say he says harei gitech liachar mosi. And there, Titus onus would be completely irrelevant to be mavatal the get, because he wants the get to be chal after his death, and he did die. But ein get lachar misa is going to kick in, and ein get chal. So the Gemara is wondering in amazement about this deflection, this dechia. Ein get lachar misa, is the Tana coming to teach me a chiddush of ein get lachar misa? Therefore, mentions the case of mes. Hatani Reisha, that's already explicit in the Reisha of that same Mishnah. We have it published in the previous Mishnah on Tafayin Bezing. And that's the case of a Shchimera who writes a get for his wife, and he says, Harei ze gitech mati, harei ze gitech micholi zeh, harei ze gitech lachar misa. Any of those three Lishonos, Lomar Klub. In all these Lishonos, his intention is that the get should be chal lachar misa. and they get lachamisa, and therefore the get is not chal lo omar klum. So when he says imati, what he means is that with my death, this get should be chal. Micholi zem means with my death, if I die from this choli, the get should be chal. So the get is not going to be chal michayim, but rather lacham misa. And the Mishnah in the Reisha is teaching me this very principle that ain't get lacham misa. So therefore, it doesn't make sense that the Mishnah would again repeat itself in the Seifim lo basim mikam v'ashoshim yom u'mes to teach me that Allah ain't get lacham misa. We already have that in the Reisha. And therefore, it's more logical to assume that the Mishnah is coming lafuke, the case of chola, to establish that chola is different than misa, and chola is not an ones, whereas misa is an ones. What I mean to say that chola is not an ones, it is an ones b'mitzius, but it's not an ones to undermine the get. Only misa is an onus to underline the. And now, if the Mishnah is not telling me ain't get lachem misa, it should have said chola ain't no get and kol shkein misa. But the reason why it mentions misa is to try to teach us that when there's an ain't get lachem misa, we're going to undermine this get. In the case of Imla Basi, he died, but not in the case of another honest like choli, because ain't honest begitin, and that would support Rava. So the Gemara says no. Even that I can reject. Dilma alafuki miraboseinu. The Tan is not coming lafuki, a case of chola, to say that the get would be chal in the case where he got sick because ain't honest begitin. The reason why the Tana mentions mace is to exclude chola, where chola would be a get, but rather we're going to say no, that mace for hua din chola. In both cases, it's not a get. In chola because of the case of ones, in misa because of ain't get lachar misa. But now we have to exclude, and this is the chiddush of the Mishnah, the shita of the Rabbi Seinu, that he meant to give the get to be chal now, yachar shteimasar chodesh. And that's based on the fact that they added a zman in the get. And because they added the zman in the get, they meant that the get should be chal lemafreya from now. But we're going to exclude the Rabbos. We're going to say, no, that's not what he meant. And that the zman doesn't prove that the get should be chal lemafreya from now, and the get will only be chal at the end of the 12 months, so therefore it's an invalid get. He says, I'll just read to you the commentary here. He says, Adayin Shem Nomar she'ein kavanas atara b'yom mes lemait chola da'avi get elahu adin gamim chola eino get, because yesh onus begitin, and there's no kiyuma tanai bonus. The Tana mentions mace. That's to teach me that ain't get lachar misa, although we already derived that from the Reisha. However, here there's an extra chiddush. Lafuke Rabbi Seinu. Rabbi Seinu disagree with this Mishnah. In a Brisa, they disagree with this Mishnah. They hold that imlo basim mikan ve'shnei mitzachot mace hareze get. I'm sorry. Hareze get lachar misa v'yeno get. B'sovrim hein she'ein ze nikra get lachar misa. Kevad shekosav begets man ksivaso, as we'll see soon. Therefore, it is a valid get. Kidisanya, Rabbi Seinu, he tirua li nase. Rabbi Seinu validated the get because of this man in the get, because the get will be chalam afreya. And for example, she doesn't fall for Yibum or Chalitza, she's a Grusha. It happens to be the same Bezdin that when Matir Shemen Shal Akum, which was originally prohibited by Takonis Chacham. And as far as get is concerned, Savri Loker Rabbi Yossi, the Omar's Mano Shel Shtar Mochiach Ola. The fact that a Zman is written in the get, it's as if he said verbally and orally in his time, Me'ayom U'liachar Misa. And for example, in Shtar Matano, Shtar Mekach, he's being makna the Gufa Nechasim from today, and the Peros Liachar Misa, let's say. And that's called Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach. So he doesn't want to get to Bichal Liachar Misa, because if so, why did he write the Zman in the get? The Zman in the get is proof positive, according to the Shita Beit Din D'Charu Mishcha, that he wants to get to Bichal Me'ayom U'liachar Misa. And therefore, if a man gives a get to his wife and he says, Imlo Basi Mikan V'ad Shnei Masar Chodesh, and he dies within the 12 months, this is not a get Liachar Misa, because why did he write the Zman in the get? The answer is to say, Imlo Basi Miyom Zeh Ad Shnei Masar Chodesh. So the Zman of the get is Mochiach, it's a proof that his intention was that the get should be Chal Hayom U'liachar Shnei Masar Chodesh. He's being Megarisha today, on the very day the Mesiras I get, that if he doesn't come within 12 months, the get should be Chal Limafreya. So the Gemara is asking now the Kasha, given that this is the Das, the opinion of Rabbeinu, Beit Din D'Charu Mishcha, the Tanav Mishnah, Imlo Basi Mikan Shnei Masar Chodesh, is coming lafuke, the opinion of the Rabbeinu, the Beit Din D'Charu Mishcha. And unless he says explicitly, or he writes explicitly, that Me Hayom, without that keyword Me Hayom, we're not going to apply the principle of Zmano Shel Get Mochiach Olam. And in fact, that's the Shita Rabbi Yehuda rejects Rabbi Yossi and Baba Basra, and he holds Rabbi Yehuda that if he doesn't write to his son Me'ayom Alachar Misa, the shtar is batel. We're not going to apply the principle of Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olam. So our Mishnah, the Sefer of our Mishnah, is not what you call Yisera. It's not Chas v'Shalom redundant and unnecessary, because in the Reish he's telling you the very principle of Ein Get Lachar Misa. In the Sefer he wants to tell me that even in the get that has a Zman in it, the Yom Ksivaso, nevertheless it is Get Lachar Misa, therefore ain't no get. But there's no proof here from this Mishnah to Rava, because it could be that the same din of ain't no get would apply to Chola, because of Yesh Onis Begitin. So we don't have any proof to Rava's position of Ein Onis Begitin. The Ella says the Gemara, perhaps we can find a source for Rava's Ein Onis Begitin from the Sefer. And it says in the Sefer, Reza Gitech Be'achshav Imlo Basi Mikan Vat Shnei Masar Chodesh Umes B'tok Shnei Masar Chodesh HaReza Get. If he adds the word Me'achshav, then everybody agrees that his kavanah was that the get should be chal today if he doesn't come after within the 12-month period, and it's not a get liachar misa. And once again, we're going to now make the diak of Rava mes vehu adin lechola. Mes is the greatest onus that you could imagine. And there's no problem with get lachar misa because he added the word me'achshav. Is mes ein lecha ones gadol mimisa. And the Mishnah says, hareza get. This is a proof that ein ones begit, that he made a t'nayim lo basi. He died, and we're going to validate the get because there's no problem of ein get lachar misa because he added me'achshav, and who had in lechola, even a lesser onus for sure, we can assume that the get would still be valid if the greatest onus does not invalidate the get, because that's not considered a kiyum atnai. Then in a lesser onus, for sure, it's not going to invalidate the get. The get will be chal despite the onus, and we conclude that yesh onus begitted. I'm sorry, and we conclude that even though he was onus, the get is chal because ain't onus begitted, and that would prove and substantiate Rav Shita. So Gemara rejects that now. Dilma meis dafka. There's reasoning to believe that the get should be chal even though he died. What was his purpose? What was motivating him to give this get? It's the nichale de tepel kamiyofan. He wants to save his wife, the future widow, so to speak, the terrible tircha, the problems, the complications in getting herself out of yibum and chalitza. So he wants to give her a get. And that's why he gave her a get. And after Misa, the get should be chal lemafreya. Because otherwise, after Misa, she falls for Yibum, and he doesn't accomplish his goal. So this is not really an onus. Onus means he didn't really want that to be that situation beyond his control to be considered a kiyum atnai. But here, obviously, he wants the Misa to be a kiyum atnai. That's his desire. That's what's motivating him. Aldas came nosalas a get. He gave her the get aldas that he would die. But to protect her from Yibum, he gave her a get. But perhaps if another onus would have happened, and then we would say that, you know what, he wants to be mavatal the get, like for example, Chola, he really wants to come, but he can't get out of his hospital bed. So he really gave the get al Tanai al Das. His kavanah was that he won't come because he won't come. You know, he'll decide that he won't come. But maybe Yeshon is begitted, and the get would be booked. We still don't have a proof to establish Rava's principle of ein onus begitted.